Okay. Thank you very much, everyone, and thank you very much to all of you that are watching from home or from wherever at this LSE-Miguel Dols Fellows workshop, this time for the autumn term 2023. And in this lectures, we have at the center, we have open lectures in which we invite either people from politics or from enterprise and the private sector, or very often also professors that are relevant for the topics that we deal in the center. But this is the one where we showcase the talent of the people that are spending one term at the LSE as fellows, or in the case of Jose, as winner of the prize from the Fundación Cañada-Blanch to come to London. So today we have 4 very interesting lectures covering economic geography, economics, and law, some finance and law, that are going to be presented by the fellows on their research and the research they are doing in collaboration with people at the center or somewhere else. The system is going to be, as in previous workshops, so Miguel Dols workshops, in which there will be a presentation of 20 minutes, then there will be question time, and then there will be feedback from me, both on the presentation and on the content. So without further ado, what I'm going to do is to introduce the first presenter, who is Pedro Fierro, who is an assistant professor at the Adolfo Ibáñez University in Chile, in Viña del Mar, if I'm not wrong. Or you're in Santiago?
Yeah.
You're based in Santiago, but the main university is in Viña.
Yes.
Okay, so good. And who is going to talk about measuring frustration and resentment in politics. So you have 20 minutes, and your 20 minutes start now.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Andres. Thank you for the opportunity being here. So I will talk about this paper, which is called Measuring Frustration and Resentment in Politics. This is a case, we use the case of Chile. And this is an ongoing work that we're doing with 2 of my Chilean colleagues. And well, that's all. So the flow of my presentations will be this. First, I will talk a little bit about the motivation of the work, just in general terms, the theoretical background, in general terms. Then I will talk about the objectives of this work. Then a little bit about the data and the methods that we use. And finally, some final remarks. I insist this is a very preliminary work, so it will be very helpful if you give me some suggestions or tips. Well, so this is about modern economic geography. This is about politics. And we know that political discontent is not a new topic in the literature. For the last 60 years, we can find different contributions in different terms that are trying to understand this phenomenon. But in the last years, maybe because of the triumph of some anti-establishment narratives, there is like a new beginning for the studies of political discontent, maybe a new interest. And some of the new works, actually some of them from Andres, say that it's not just about individual factors when we talk about discontent, but also about places. There are some places that are left behind, some people that live in these places that may have these feelings about frustrations, powerlessness, or resentment. And actually, in political science, there are a lot of new contributions. For instance, some people like Pippa Norris, Engelhardt, different, important scholars that say that these sentiments of powerlessness and resentment may influence, for instance, or lead us to vote or to support anti-establishment narratives like populism or nationalism. But even when we talk about these sentiments, there is no an agreement about what they are. Maybe we can find some hints, but there is no agreement about how to measure these different sentiments as frustration and resentment. So the main idea of this paper is trying to understand frustration and resentment not just about material conditions, not just about like absolute deprivation, but also about expectatives. And the answer that political system give to these sentiments, to these demands of citizens. So the main thing here is how to measure this, how to measure resentment and frustrations. And the decision that we took was to come back to the classics in political science. And this is one of the classics. This is William Gamson in the 60s. William Gamson said that a combination of high sense of political efficacy and low political trust is the optimum scenario combination for movement. So we know that there's a belief that influence is both possible and necessary. But the next year, some scholars suggested that this definition or this argument has some problems, you know, because, well, what is trust? I mean, why is talking about Gamson about this political trust? There are different types of trust. Maybe trust in government, trust in authorities, trust in people, and he didn't specify about this. But most importantly, he didn't specify about political efficacy, and this is the main thing about this paper. Because he used like a unidimensional concept of political efficacy. Political efficacy can be understood as the sense that my political actions may influence the decision of government. This is like a general definition of political efficacy. Nevertheless, in the next years, some people say that there are different kinds of political efficacies. I mean that there are different dimensions of this political efficacy. And these are the two dimensions that are mostly studied in the next years. The internal dimension, which is more related with the individual belief of self-competence, and the external dimension that is more related to the system responsiveness beliefs. And this is the main thing of this paper, because we follow this Craig thesis that offer a reinterpretation of the Gamsonian hypothesis and say that there is not just about trust and efficacy, it's more about the differences, the gap between these two kinds of efficacy. So he said that when people have higher sense of system responsiveness beliefs, but at the same time they have lower sense of the higher sense of the self-competence beliefs, but lower sense of system responsiveness beliefs, this is the optimum scenario for protest. This is the optimal scenario for looking for a new alternative. So this is one of the main things of the paper, and hold this. We use the case of Valparaiso. I say the case of Chile, but we are focusing on in Valparaiso. Valparaiso, I'm not going to talk too much about this, but Valparaiso is one of the biggest regions in Chile. Is home of the National Congress, and actually we have a very important event like 4 years ago in 2019. We have these massive riots with a lot of destruction in Chile, and actually because of these riots, we have actually today finished the ongoing constituent process. We're writing our constitutions because of these massive riots that we live in 2019. The good thing about this paper is that we have data 3 years before these massive riots and 3 years after these massive riots. This paper have mostly two objectives. So the first part of this paper is dedicated to trying to offer a measure of political resentment and political frustration. And we're going to use the Gamson hypothesis, that's why I told about this. And the second part of this paper is trying to understand which factors are related with the development of political resentment. So, well, this is about the data, but we use 10,000 face-to-face cases in the Chilean region of Valparaiso. I just told about the 3 years after and 3 years before 2019. This is a very good sample. These are the cities that are covered by the survey. Just an idea, 70% of the people in the region lives in this area. So it's a very good measure. But this is the important thing. So when I talk about system responsiveness beliefs. What is, well, how to measure this? So we use this set of questions. What time? How much time I have?
We've got about 10 minutes.
Okay. So we use these questions like politicians do not really care about what the voter thinks. So usually you cannot trust in the political leaders to do what is the best for the country. Or the politician wastes a lot of taxpayer money. Or citizens like me don't have any influence in the decision of the parliament and government. These are not like invented questions. These are like the questions that are usually used to measure external efficacy. And to measure internal efficacy, we use these kind of questions. Sometimes politics is so complicated. I do not find it that difficult to take a stand on political issues. When people debate economic policy, I only understand a small part of what they are talking about. Citizens like me are qualified to participate in political discussions, and citizens like me have opinions that are worth listening to. So we use actually, obviously we recorded some questions in order that we have, this is measured in a Likert scale of 5 points, so people have to answer if they are agree or disagree with these statements. So 1 is less efficacy and 5 is strong efficacy. But we use, obviously we employ this from alpha, this reliability test. Hello, Nico. Go ahead, please. We have some Chilean audience, so I'm a little bit nervous. So we use this reliability test in order to build a factor, and we use structural equation models to build some factors for internal efficacy and external efficacy. As you can see, we didn't use all the questions. We just used 3 for each factor. So after that, and this is the important thing to me, what is so frustration and resentment? So we use this common distinction in economics. It's not like using so many times in politics between flow and stock variables. And we understood frustration as a flow variable, as a gap between efficacies each year, or like a picture, and political resentment as a stock variable. So as the accumulation of this frustration. Because of this, particularly when we talk about resentment, time is an essential factor to do this. So these are just descriptive figures. We can see that this is the system responsiveness beliefs, and this is the self-competence beliefs. And we can see that after 2019, here is like our social outburst, our social uprising. It was a time when we can see the biggest gap between the two of them. So this is very important for us. This is like a methodological proposal for measure resentment and frustration. But this application is very important for trying to understand what happened in Chile in 2019. So this is the moment when the people feel more self-confidence, but at the same time they felt that the system did not answer to their demands. So as we can see, this is the gap. This is the evolution, the means of the frustration here. But this is another important thing. As we understood, resentment is accumulation of frustration. So maybe after the 2012, frustration is increasing in Chile. So many of the people is celebrating, that frustration is decreasing in Chile, but this is still positive. So the resentment is still growing up. And this is a very important thing for this interpretation or for this proposal. But the problem is that we cannot understand the factors that may influence resentment because we are using cross-sectional data. So the second part of our analysis is trying to offer a technique not so usually used in politics to try to understand or to build a panel with cross-sectional data. So we use grouping techniques, a pseudo panel and a pseudo panel approach. Basically, we create different groups by using these 3 variables: gender, socioeconomic status, and age. I have here These are like the 36 groups that we created for each year. So we have like a new database with 2016 cases, but now we have like a panel datasets, panel datasets, I mean. So this is the main way. So we can do now some analysis by including this type, analyzing the groups. This is just descriptive things, but it's important because of our first claim that this is not just about material conditions. This is the evolution of resentment in people with a low socioeconomic status. And here in blue and green, we can see the young people with low socioeconomic status. And here, red and orange, we can see the old people with low socioeconomic status. So we can see this in the figure 5, in the figure 4, that young people tend to accumulate more resentment than old people. This is like, maybe is not new, But the important thing, I believe, is this. This is another comparison. So we made a lot of these different kinds of comparisons. These are just examples. But these are the difference between just young people. And we can see the green and orange, the young people, but with higher socioeconomic status. And in red and blue, the young people, but with lower socioeconomic status. And we can see that the group of people that tend to accumulate more resentment and frustration is the young people, but with higher socioeconomic status. This is a little bit more counterintuitive, but as we understood frustration, is very, it's not too much counterintuitive. The people who accumulate more like internal efficacy, so the people that feel more competent, is not the lower socioeconomic status, it's the higher socioeconomic status people. And this is very important to try to interpret what happened in Chile and what is happening in Chile right now. We see that in 2019, for instance, all the movements and all the social outbursts was led by university students or young professionals. So this is not just about material conditions. It's not just about absolute deprivation. It's more about the expectative that people have and the answer that the government is given or not to these expectations. And after this, this is like the inferential part of our analysis, but we are really, this is the really ongoing work. We try to figure out a model to try to understand a little bit more about resentment. Obviously, political efficacy is highly related with the development of resentment. So those people that are more interested in politics tend to accumulate more resentment, but we didn't see another patterns, in particular in ideology. But we can see some differences when we include some interactions. So when we included some interactions, we see that political interest lost the significance in some of the models, but the interaction between ideology and political interest become significant. This is just really ongoing work. We are trying to figure out which is the model that maybe we can test in order to understand a little bit more about resentment. But even with that, we think that we're very happy because of this work, because help us to understand a lot of things, not just in Chile, but also in other parts of the world. And we think that we offer a new kind of measurement of resentment and frustration. These two variables, internal and external efficacy, are often included in some of the biggest surveys in the world. The European Social Survey have measures like that. The National Electoral Surveys in the United States also included some of these questions. So we can try to understand what is happening in different countries in the world by using this technique. But obviously, the application of this technique in Chile have some important things, we think. This counterintuitive perspective that it's not just about absolute deprivation, it's more about expectations. So that help us to understand what happened with higher socioeconomic status people. And in particular in Chile, it helps us to understand what is happening after these social movements that we lived 4 years ago, this social outburst or social uprising, or I don't know how to call it. But that obviously this is a work with a lot of limitations, and we have to do this at the individual level by using panel data maybe, or trying to understand this in other contexts, you know. But that's all. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Pedro. Questions from the audience? Let's start. Yes, go ahead, Helena.
I really in some way missed, due to the timing that you have, I think due to the timing constraint, why you choose to give like just attention to some of the question rather than other. How do you make this choice? Because I think that some of the questions in your survey merit much more weight than other, but this may be just my opinion. I don't really get how do you choose them. And also my other question was, which is the detail of the data inside of your survey, like how much you can localize individual across the space, and whether if you have data on that, why you're also not constructing a panel data at the regional or at the local level to link more to the literature that you mentioned at the beginning.
Yeah,
That's just curiosity.
Yeah, definitely you have very good points. I mean, this is the first attempt, you know. So obviously we have different data, and actually each of these cases are geocoded. So we have like the longitude and latitude of each of these cases. Actually, we have another paper that we're working with that. But we decided to start with this paper. Definitely there are some territorial questions that appear, you know, not just in terms of the cleavage between, for instance, the center and peripheral municipalities that are considered, that we saw that there are some patterns about that, but also because we can just like see the patterns in neighborhoods, you know, that we also saw some of these patterns. But yeah, definitely you have a point. And how we decided to use these questions is because of this reliability test. You know, I mean, we put all the questions of a like theoretical question of internal and external efficacy, and because of the suggestion of this alpha Cronbach analysis, it's like they suggest or the analysis suggests an item that you can delete to have a better alpha Cronbach. You know? So this is like, yeah, it's not our decision. It was the decision of the technique that we use. You know, that's why we use 3 of the questions, you know, in each term. That's what.
Yeah, that was my point, in the sense that I think that some of your question can be much more related to the literature that you were mentioning. So could be like another test or something on which you can work more in the future. That could be even something that you choose because of the literature rather than for an algorithm. I don't know, that was mainly my suggestion. But of course.
Yeah. I mean that this was like a data-driven decision, you know, but definitely we can, I mean, maybe we can just analyze each of the questions, because each of the questions have some meaning in the literature, you know, not just creating this factor, you know. Exactly. But yeah, definitely.
Thanks.
Maybe to that, just if you then go on with your inferential statistics, you could just do different sets of questions and then test that in inferential statistics and see what maybe makes most sense according to the model you chose.
Yeah, definitely. Actually, we followed these options because in political psychology, it's like a boom about this structural equation modeling and the creation of these factors. And that's why we use this pattern, you know, trying to identify this latent pattern. But yeah, definitely we can do that. Definitely. Thank you.
No one else? If not, it's my turn.
Okay.
Those are the questions. First one, why do you choose the places that you choose? You choose Valparaiso and some surrounding areas and not others. What is the reason you haven't? How big is the sample? And I was going to ask why those questions in the end and not others that you have decided. Second thing, you have highlighted that this is a rise in discontent that is gripping, in this case, Chile, and it was exploded in 2019. But it's not a phenomenon that is specifically limited to Chile. We're seeing what's happening in the elections in Argentina in the next couple of weeks. We got Colombians where they had more or less a situation very similar to that of Argentina in terms of the choices you had for office. And here we have Brits that had to deal with Brexit. We have Italians where we have that level of discontent, and we have Spaniards where we've seen the phenomenon of the rise of the extremes in recent periods. To what extent what you're finding in Chile can be extended to other parts of the world, and how can it be applied?
Yeah. Okay, perfect. So the first question, why this area? This is like a practical decision. It's because I'm in charge of this survey, for the last 10 years. And the mom is because of this, area. They have to understand what is happening in Valparaiso. And obviously they have some problems, but I think that it has some other benefits, because it's super strange to find some surveys that measuring these political attitudes at the local level with data that is representative in each of the municipalities that are included. So that's why we can start to do this kind of things, trying to understand some spatial patterns. If we use another kind of question, for instance, Latinobarometro or the typical surveys that are placed in Latin America, they don't allow us to do this kind of things. But of course, that we want to understand what is happening in the rest of not just in Chile, but also in the rest of Latin America and in the world. That's why I think that a very good news for us is that these kind of questions are used in the other surveys, are used in the Latinobarometro. Latinobarometro covered like 20 countries in Latin America. The European Social Survey, I think that maybe more than 20. And these surveys usually included this kind of question. So definitely, this is what we want to do, but we have to start with this because it's the survey that I'm in charge of. This is the practical decision. But of course, we have to look. One of the problems in the Chilean academic is that we are very focused on Chile. Trying to understand what is happening in Chile. And maybe this is because of geographical reasons. We have the mountains and the ocean and the desert, So, but yeah, we have to look around the world.
Okay, so before we move on, some comments on the delivery of the presentation. I think the topic is very interesting. I think you can probably say much more about how we can connect, or the case of Chile connects to what's happening elsewhere in Latin America, but also in Europe. But in terms of delivery, there are two things. First, you have to know your audience. The presentation was a bit too technical for an audience that you knew already that was going to have lawyers and architects and people from economics and finance, etc. It's even for me, I'm still struggling to understand what do you mean by measure the gap that leads to that discontent. So you have to try to portray it in a way that is far more accessible than you are at the moment, because we understand that it's a question of self-confidence, but lack of self-confidence, but also the whole objective situation. But what is it exactly that you're measuring? That's the first thing. Second thing, in terms of delivering, and I keep on saying this, perhaps I shouldn't be talking about this, but we're all here at this stage in which you are in front of an audience and you try to deliver your presentation from here. You're a good speaker and it works very well, but you're here, which makes you're far away from the audience in a relatively small room, when the room actually brings you here. I know that Juan is over here, so I don't want to go beyond Juan, because then Juan doesn't see me. But this is probably, you don't have a problem with the screen, it doesn't go into your eyes, and this is where you dominate the audience. So I can engage with everyone here. And you can say, but yes, but I have to go over there to change the slides. No, you have this.
No, okay, I do.
And I can do it like this, and that makes a difference. So it's a small thing that will allow you to make what you're saying, and you're saying you have a very interesting topic, far more convincing than actually just trying to be there, having to move behind, and then engaging less with the audience. That is, yeah. Okay,
Thank you.
so thank you very much. So let's move to the second presentation, which is by Tatiana Neuhuber.
Yeah.
Yes, who is from the Technical University of Vienna, I think this is Universität Wien. It's going to be extending the perspective of foundational livability, income, infrastructure, and time as three pillars of an alternative well-being indicator. So after what I said, you might want
Yes.
this.
Now I know what to do. Hi, everyone. I will be talking, as Andres said, on trying to figure out how we can understand well-being, livability, inequality. I'll probably use those words as synonyms, so don't be mad at me. So I'll try, or what we are trying to do is figure out how can we understand it better in more detail, and really trying to go beyond income. So where we started, it is a project that's very in, like, as we say, like it's very in its early ages. So we started with our past paper. What we tried to do is understand how income inequality differs in Austria to get us started, right? So one of the most used inequality measures, some of you might know them, are the Gini index and the tile index. And albeit them being based on different calculations, they most often use income, more specifically adjusted household income. Well, also many of you might be aware that there is a lot of critique on income inequality, or the sole use of income inequality. And that's why people like us try to find out how can we understand it, again, in more detail, more holistically. Especially in a regional context. And that's where I come in from the spatial planning side or economic geography side, to really try to dig deep into the regional differences within a country. So where we started is we collaborated with actually colleagues in the UK, Calafati et al. They published a paper 2 years ago where they exactly tried to figure out, okay, so we have income, that's not all that matters, right? Because households, they have expenditure. They have to pay for housing, for electricity, for transport, and so on. They have to do it, otherwise they would probably die if they don't eat. So what they did is they took the income and then deducted essentials, again, such as housing or transport. And what they did is they called it residual income. So really the income that is left after essential expenditure. And that's where we got interested, and we were like, okay, that's interesting. How can we use that and go even further? Again, if you're interested in the topic, I can highly recommend you the book by our UK colleagues. It's called When Nothing Works. They really look at UK differences in this case. And that's where we, as an Austrian team, come in and say, okay, we really want to do that in Austria, extend the approach, and then try to say, okay, how can other researchers use it in other countries? Our colleague Richard Berntaler, he was the one who said, okay, income is important, expenditure is important, But what about intra-household inequalities, such as time use? And I think everyone here is aware that there are vast differences in how people use their time, how a household uses their time, and again, like gender differences, for example, or differences in socioeconomic status. All these things influence how people use their time, and how people use their time influences how much money they make, how much they have to spend on things like a kindergarten, school, transport, and so on. So we took these approaches. We took the residual income approach from our colleagues in the UK, Calafati et al. We took our ideas by our colleague Richard Berntaler, who kind of said, okay, what about time use? And now we're kind of trying to bring those together, which leads us to what we call RESI plus. It's residual income plus. So again, extending the initial approach of the residual income. I will talk about the data we will use. Again, the project is in its infancy. So we just recently got the data. Our statistical office pushed back the data acquisition, which is why we were forced to start the project way later than we wanted to. But I will try to tell you what we aim to do, what challenges we experience, because there are plenty, and then maybe try to see what others can do with their ideas, or maybe your ideas, which can be incorporated in our project. So the main research questions we are trying to solve in the next years or so is, first of all, how does residual income differ in Austria? So we take the income of people, we deduct essential expenditure, and then we are left with the residual income, and we want to do this for Austria. As spatially disaggregated as the data lets us, which will bring me to one challenge I will talk at the end of the presentation. Then, as I already mentioned, we don't want to stick with like monetary dimensions like income or expenditure. We really want to understand how people experience everyday life, kind of, which is why we want to incorporate social infrastructure. Is it available, and how accessible is it? And I think it's the same in the UK as in Austria. The differences across the country are insane. We have Vienna, which has 2 million inhabitants, a lot of schools, a lot of kindergartens, a lot of social infrastructure, basically. But then as soon as you leave Vienna and the further south you go in Austria, the less social infrastructure. And again, that influences how people have to spend their time. If there's no kindergarten, someone has to take care of the children, right? If there is no GP that is public, I might have to go to a private one, which influences my income. So you see, like, there are all the dimensions coming together, and we're still trying to figure out how we best put all those things together. But that's, I guess, why it's so important to really try to figure out how the interactions work. Then we have the time use, where we will use the time use survey from 1 year ago. Actually, it's still not out yet, but it will come out. And you really see how people use their time. Do they have a car? How far do they go with their car to, for example, bring their children to school, etc. And third, what can we do about it? So just to get you started, and I bashed income inequality, but in a recent paper, we actually looked at income inequality. That's just the local income inequality distribution, so every municipality grouped by province. We do have 9 provinces in Austria. Vienna is not depicted here because in the paper we excluded Vienna because of data reasons. But you can see basically that already, just looking at income, there are vast differences. So we have Vorarlberg, which is close to Switzerland. it's the most unequal country, province. Why? Because there are so many people that earn a lot of money, and there are people who don't earn that much money, right? So the inequality is quite high. Whereas we have Burgenland, which is bordering Hungary, on the other side, as the least unequal province. Then we did look at the effects of social infrastructure spending. So down here, you can just see a box plot of inequality, of the local inequalities for each province. And on top, we tried to measure how the social infrastructure spending, so how much a municipality spends on social infrastructure and how much a province spends on social infrastructure, affects local inequality. I don't want to get into the details, but you can see from Burgenland to Vorarlberg, differences are insane. Again, I don't want to explain, or maybe we can discuss it later, why that is, because we don't really know. We do have some kind of hints, but looking at the data alone, looking at income inequality, for example, alone, doesn't explain or doesn't let us really understand what is behind it. That's more about why we are motivated to do it. Just a quick overview where we are starting. Again, the residual income is we take the income of people, we adjust it to the household, we deduct living costs, which leads us to the residual income. The data we use is the Integrated Wage and Income Survey, which basically gives us information about every person in Austria earning money in some kind of way. We know how old they are, we know their gender, we know where they are employed, we know how much they work, we know where they live. Then we link that to the household budget survey, which is where we get the information on how much they spend, for example, on food, for housing, for energy. And we have like, I think it's 70 variables where we try to really understand how do they live, for example, do they rent, do they own, do they live in a municipal housing, which is of course way cheaper than a private market. How do they heat? Because if I am a high income household, I might be able to afford a very efficient heating system. Whereas if I live in a really shitty building and I can't afford to change that, or I'm a tenant and I'm not even allowed to change it, I might have to pay way more of my income for energy, right? So that does make a difference. We have health expenditure, we have transport and education. And again, we try to understand, for example, kindergarten. It's something in Austria where the expenditure differs crazy across the country. In Vienna, it's free, whereas in Styria, in the south, it's 300 euros per child per month. So even though that maybe to people in the UK doesn't sound too bad, alone the difference between 0 and 300, it does make a difference to people. Okay, so we do have income, we do have the living costs, we do use time use data, and then we also try to bring in infrastructure. So trying to get down on how do people live and how can they access the infrastructure they need. And we get to the residual income plus. What we're trying to do then, because we have tons of data and we're still not sure how to get it into one data set that actually does make sense. So I hope eventually I can present you in a year or so with actual results. But what we're trying to do is trying to figure out how is the household characterized? Do they live alone? Do they live in, are they a couple? Do they have children? How is the infrastructure where they live? Is it good, bad, very good, very bad? And how do they use their time? Is there a lot of unpaid care work in the household? Or do they maybe go to the private market to pay for childcare? And again, trying to bring that together to the residual income plus. Many, many challenges, and I want to talk about that on the last slide. Besides the time use, as I said, we are trying to bring in infrastructure where we use basic GIS methods, where we try on the one hand to get how accessible is it, so how long does it take to get somewhere, and also how available is it. So for example, opening times, right? They differ across the country as well, especially in things like kindergarten or daycare. And here, once again, because I haven't talked about it enough, is how all those dimensions come together. We start at the income, which I criticized at the beginning. We have the household budget. We come to the residual income here. On the left-hand side, we do have geodata for infrastructure, where we then build something that we called infrastructure quality class. Again, is it good, bad, very bad, very good? And on the right-hand side, we have time use. And then we will try to aggregate it and differentiate that according to household type, to the region they live in, to something like age groups, gender, and so on. We will have to see what the data actually lets us do. Okay. To conclude, Austria, it's nationally seen, it's a very low unequal country, so the inequality, the Gini index is quite low compared to other countries nationally, because what I showed you earlier is that we experience vast differences across the country, and that's just income alone. We do not know a lot in Austria about inequality that goes beyond income, so there's little research on that. And we know that how much a municipality spends on social infrastructure or how much a province spends on social infrastructure has different effects in different provinces, and we don't know why. So that's where we are departing from. And again, the challenges we are facing and we will continue to face is the data acquisition. It's a very lengthy process. It's a very expensive process as well. So we got the data, still not sure when we'll get, for example, the time use data, because they keep pushing back the date of release. We do have the restriction that the time use data, as I said, is from last year or 2021, 2022, whereas we have income data from 2019. The thing with the income data is it comes out for every year, but 2 years after. So we will get the 2021 data, and we got it this year, but for 2022, it will take another year. The thing with the expenditure data is it comes out only every 5 years. So the time that all of the data sets actually are from the same year probably will never come. We tried to already kind of figure out how can we match the data or impute the data, for example, expenditure data, so we can have a proxy, but that will be a challenge. Identifying how we can aggregate and to which characteristics we can aggregate, still up to debate. And again, data availability is still a thing. So we don't know, for example, mortgage payments. So we don't know if I own a house, I don't know how much debt they pay back monthly, which is a huge thing, because in Austria, if you buy a house, not a lot of people give them the 500,000 on hand and say, that's it. So that's a big constraint as well. Okay. Thank you very much.
So, questions, yeah, would like to ask a question. Yes, go ahead, Jaime.
Perhaps a bit of a comment or a question. You were saying that there are differences in the social infrastructure spending and in the effect that you have. And I mean, I am only recalling this vaguely from but I think, in developing countries, which I perfectly understand that Austria is not, but in developing countries, they usually use this concept of marginal value or marginal utility to, institutions like the World Bank or just to measure what is the marginal effect of one extra dollar invested there. And usually one doctor in a region where there are no hospitals is a lot more valuable than the 100th doctor in a hospital, with the same salary and the same investment. So I don't know, have you given some thought to this methodology or?
No, to be honest, no, we haven't.
I think that even on the last slide.
I think I can go back. Yes, no, we haven't actually, and it's a good comment. And we actually might look into that. What I'm referring here is what I showed you earlier, like the box plot where you have like the effects of the municipality and the province, which is what we looked at the data at the previous paper. But that's a good comment, and we'll definitely, because we have the data, we might as well try to look into that as well. So thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, Eleanor?
It's mainly a curiosity. I do not completely get how like the use of timing injure. I think that this could be related with like complementarity with infrastructure, for example, and how you are going to deal with that. And then another point is like the infrastructure that you mentioned. Who is providing that infrastructure? Which kind of government? And I think that could be related also to the level of your income. So how are you extrapolating these two channels?
That's a very good question. To the first comment, that's also what we are discussing. And we are highly aware that the correlation between infrastructure and how people use and time use, because you're forced to go further if there's no infrastructure. And again, we don't know yet. It's something we'll probably figure out once we have the data and we can actually try to aggregate it and see how the data actually behaves, because I really don't know yet, but we are aware, and that's why I guess why it's so hard to go beyond something that we can actually measure, like income, because it's so damn hard to just bring it together and then like make sense of the data. Your second question, yes, we are trying to bring that into it by look again, who provides it does make a difference. And we'll try to differentiate between, for example, private GPs or private kindergartens, private schools, and public. And then because again, in one province, it might be cheap, like private kindergartens, again, are cheaper than private kindergartens in another province. So we'll bring that into, again, I don't know how, but we'll try to. Thank you.
Victor?
Yes, thank you for your presentation. It's very interesting. And I mean, feels to me, yeah, you have a lot of data. I guess at some point you will address all these concerns of coloniality and stuff, or also the unit of measurement, I guess, is different. Some cases is family, some cases is local, no? How do you deal with that?
Yeah.
But my question is, what is the research question you have? I mean, what are you interested in? Are you interested in showing that the inequality, once you add all these components, is very different from the income? Is it that the regional inequality is very high because you include all these infrastructure things, so you want to prove that regional inequality is very high? I mean, what is your argument?
Yeah, thanks. Both actually. So our first motivation was your first comment that income is not enough, but that leads actually to your second comment, where it's like it is not enough, especially because we have all those things that differ regionally. Right, so if I earn in Vorarlberg, I'm a rich person, and infrastructure is, for example, plenty. So, and housing is cheap, and I remain a rich person. But if I live in Styria and I'm a not so rich person, and I have to pay for kindergarten, and I have 5 children, that it's a big difference, right? So I guess the first motivation of income is not enough, and that's why we are starting at the first research question, where we solely look into income and expenditure, which is going to the most simple thing, I guess, in the whole project, where we just say, okay, we have income, but that's not enough, so we just deduct essentials. And then we're trying to bring all that in to also say, okay, but again, regionally, it's even worse than just looking into income and expenditure.
Ms. Constanze?
I was wondering if you're planning also to differentiate between difference between regions and between cities and inner regions, because, for example, I mean, for sure the public goods provision is really different between cities and inner regions, and so you might have a region with a lot of cities, so the overall inequality in that regions might be lower because public goods provision in cities is higher. So I was wondering if
a very good comment. And the thing with our data is, so the income data we have for every person. So I think it's like 5 million entries, which is a lot. But then we go to the household budget survey, which is it's representative, but it's only like 9,000 or 10,000. And we link that, so we end up with 10,000, right? So it's only representative to the province, but also, as you said, or what the Statistic Austria calls municipality size classes, which is exactly where we try to differentiate, is it a big municipality, a city, or is it really tiny? So we have different spatial aggregation levels we will look into.
Okay, so I think we better move on to my comments on this. I think many of my comments came already in the previous questions, especially in the ones I picture, but I'm going to be a bit of a devil's advocate. And my first question is, what is wrong with income? I mean, you probably heard this a lot, but you only have income is simple.
Yes.
And we'll know what income is. You're preparing an index, which is the RESI plus. It tries to go beyond income, but is highly complicated, in which you include a lot of factors, some individual, some territorial, some by household. So what do you add that's new relative to income? First. Second, how do you apply this from a policy perspective? Because when you go and talk to a politician, they know what income is, and they know what inequality is, and they know what, let's say, relative poverty is. But what is a RESI plus, and how can they apply it? And then the third one, which is, you're saying you were inspired by, third one, sorry. You said that you're going to look at the residual income in Austria and how it differs by income and household. So I was expecting to see a map. You're saying this is where we have differences. These are the places where we have, in Vorarlberg, it's much better than in Syria, and how do we see that? And my question would be, does it differ that much from differences in income, or is it highly correlated? And then the final one, you said you are inspired by work that has been conducted in the UK, and then you're going to apply it to Italy, France, UK, Germany, Belgium, and Austria. Do you expect to find significant differences between these countries or not? So
first of all, income. And I'm not trying to bash income to its fullest, because again, in our previous paper, we used income, and I think it's very important because, as you said, it's more or less easily measured. It's easy to understand for politicians. It's well researched. Every country almost has data on it, so we can compare it. So I don't want to downplay the importance of looking at income inequality. What I guess we're just trying to say is that, and hopefully we'll find in the project, is that it doesn't necessarily correlate, which refers to, I think, a third question of like, if I have a high income and the expenditure, I remain rich. I think the differences will be more granular in terms of where do I live and what it does to my income, more or less. And then, because if I'm a rich or not say rich, but like medium income person or household, but I do have to travel very far to a public GP. So I take the private GP. I have to spend more, which then does something to regional disparities, I guess. And that's where the politicians come in, because if you look at infrastructure, for example, or we do have to find a way to provide everyone with what our colleagues, so foundational livability actually comes from our UK colleagues, to provide everyone with the least foundational livability possible, which in this case would be GPs. So I have to, one policy in that term would be, we don't have many GPs in Vorarlberg or Tyrol because no one wants to live there, because it's very underfunded in terms of what can be done if you're not 70 years old and stuck to your bed, or are a tourist. So then I have to make it more attractive, and so GPs go there. That would be kind of where we are trying to argue into the policy making. And I know it's way more complex than saying, listen, people in Vorarlberg earn a lot, people in Burgenland don't, so we have to do something about it, either like give them cash benefits or whatever. But it might be more complex, and that's where we are trying to go with like the infrastructure policies, and also time use policies are now a huge trend in research. So that's also one avenue we're going. The comparability, I think, was your last.
With GDP or income of your livability index, your RESI plus.
Ah, yeah, okay. So, well, let's go back. Oh no. What our colleagues did in the UK, where they just found out that in the UK it differs a lot. Now we're doing it in Austria. The project is not necessarily the same in each country. I had on the slide here: UK, Italy, France, Germany, Austria, and Belgium. So we all come in from very different perspectives and with very different data resources, right? That's one thing which is going to be very hard, because our project is related to Austria. We do have the data for Austria, and it's really nice. But what can we do in other countries is not necessarily the same, which also makes it a huge challenge and a constraint as well. So not necessarily everyone's going to work on RESI Plus. They will try to do their best in terms of, again, income and expenditures all available in almost every country. So the residual income can be calculated, but time use surveys, for example, are not. In Austria, they weren't available for the longest time because of our right-wing party. So again, we're trying to bring all different perspectives into it, not necessarily all calculating the same thing.
Okay. Well, before we just a few comments very quickly on the style of presentation. I like very much your slides because they're simple. They don't normally have a lot of words apart from this one, but in general they're clear and they're well. I think you need a few more visuals on the slides in a way to help. But you had the same tendency as Pedro to go there. You ended up hitting the desk over there, and you tend to rely too much on going back and looking at the slides and pointing out. When you have the clicker,
Yeah.
the good thing is that you can also do it like that. So it's much simpler. So I keep on saying you have to feel comfortable. And the only way to feel comfortable is you have to own the stage. And the best way is to do it from here again. And then if you have to point to something, you know the topic much more than we do. And you know the topic much more than any potential audience. So the idea is to try to connect to the audience as much as you can while you're doing the presentation. And try to first know who your audience is, try to know what the setting is. When you see some political debates, in political debates, the most important thing or the biggest discussion is who is going to wear what, who is going to be placed where, and how they're going to deliver in order to be more convincing. You have an interesting topic, as Pedro has an interesting topic, but you have to look convincing, not just is about the content that you have. If you look convincing, people are going to be more convinced on your topic than if you actually try to hide behind the desk and say, look, maybe what I'm doing, I'm not completely sure of what I'm doing, then people are going to be questioning what you're doing. But in any case, thank you very much. It was a very nice presentation. And now we move to world of economics and finance. And we have, Rosa is from the University of Valencia, and she's going to be talking about the aftermath of satellite obtained images on the individual's right to data protection.
Good evening, my name is Rosa, and the topic I will present today is the aftermath of satellite obtained images in the individual's right to data protection. To begin with, I think it's a good occasion to thank both Andres for hosting us at the center and Victor for organizing the workshop. And this is the structure I am going to follow for this presentation. First of all, it is important to provide you with some introductory remarks. Space technologies, by definition, are at the cutting edge of innovation, bringing up numerous benefits and, of course, playing a crucial role in our day-to-day life. This means that remote sensing is one of these technologies, space technologies, and the most important one relates to this topic. Remote sensing can be defined, for instance, as the obtaining and recording of information from an object without having direct contact with it. In this case, the object that is from which we obtain information is the airline. And how is this done? Well, we have a satellite. It can also be done using airplanes, but for this case, I am talking about satellites on whose surface we are going to put a camera that will obtain information from the terrestrial area, providing a lot of details from this terrestrial area that otherwise could be imperceptible for the naked eye. Once this data is captured, it is transmitted to a grounded station on Earth, where it is analyzed and, of course, interpreted. When we talk about remote sensing technologies, the focus is mainly on the advancement of technology in providing high-resolution imagery, high delivery speeds of space data, and big data processing capabilities of artificial intelligence on board satellites. The protection of individuals' fundamental rights is essential. I think we all can agree on that. And it is of utmost importance to acknowledge to what extent these fundamental rights can be affected by developing technologies, remote sensing being one of those. So today I want to make you think about how our right to data protection can be affected by these technologies. So at this point, you may be thinking, but how? Well, many companies across the world operate hundreds of satellites with Earth observation technologies that can provide very high resolution imagery. For instance, we have in 2010 a village in the US which used Google Earth in order to know which people were building illegal swimming pools in their rooftops, yes, and well, they of course collected fines from it. This was a scandal and they stopped with this practice, but it was done and no legislation was in place back then, so it was really a scandal. This was possible precisely because today satellite imagery can have a resolution of 2.5 meters or even less. And this, together with an open data and policy and easy accessibility to these images, because they are provided in apps like Google Earth, Google Maps, Bing Maps that we all use all the time, makes it much more easier for people to just go and watch the backyard of your house. Therefore, this is, for instance, an example, so you can see how precise an image can be. And there is a growing tendency towards making it even more precise. Now, when does the law come into play? There is a field in international law, which is called international space law, and which basically governs human activity in outer space. And the main legal instruments are called corpus juris spatialis. This is basically a set of normative provisions and legal principles which were adopted in the framework of the United Nations General Assembly, basically in the decade of the 1960s until the 1990s. The most important ones are 5 international principles, the ones showcased here, being the most important one, the 1967 Outer Space Treaty. But when it comes to data protection, they basically say nothing, which is normal because they were adopted before the age data came in. But it is true that if we think about it, there are several provisions in terms of international liability that we can resort to. For instance, for breaches of data protection issues. Otherwise, it makes no sense to resort to these instruments. And it happens the same with the 1986 remote sensing principles, which are part of these corpus juris spatialis I told you before. These were adopted in 1986, again, when the H data was not still that developed. And they, even though were conceived at first as principles, as legal principles, that means they don't have a hard law value, they are soft law. This means states are not obliged to comply with them, but since states have complied with them since their adoption, we have endowed them with customary legal value. And that is why I have put them here, because they are really relevant. The problem, as happens with the space treaties, is that they do not specifically address data protection because their scope is very limited to purposes such as improving natural resource management, land use, environmental protection, which are areas where no data privacy issues usually arise, and also because they are very state interest centered. They do not address what can happen to individuals or what are individuals' interests at all. Basically, the conclusion is that international space law is not the adequate framework to deal with privacy breaches. In this sense, so data holders that want to have their right to data protection secured, we have to resort either to national or other international instruments for this purpose. And here I could have chosen any other legal framework, but I'm a European Union citizen, which means that my personal data is protected under the General Data Protection Regulation, which entered into force in 2016, and that is why I will talk about this in particular. This General Data Protection Regulation is the main instrument in this field, and it happens again the same. It doesn't address specifically either outer space or the collection or processing of personal data that comes from space. But still, it is very interesting to analyze it because there is no need for it to tackle this directly in order to be applicable. In this sense, it is necessary to talk, first of all, about what is personal data. What does this mean? And we have a definition in Article 4, first paragraph of the GDPR, so I will refer to it from now on. Basically, it is very interesting to know what the European Court of Justice said in this respect, because we can see here that according to the court, any information here means any information related to an identified or identifiable natural person, the data subject. So this term, any information, comprises basically everything. Everything that could make a person identified or identifiable. So space data can make a person identifiable. How? By combining raw data obtained directly from the space systems with other data sets, GPS, social media posts, or any other set security cameras that bring data, which together with this one can make a person identifiable. And that, of course, poses a serious privacy concern. So in this sense, we could have this personal data definition complied with, which is the first requirement in order to apply the GDPR. The second requirement is to comply with the territoriality criterion set forth in Article 3 of the GDPR. Here, there are two criterion. You have to comply either with one of them. If any of them is met, the GDPR will be applicable. You have them here explained, but let me put you an example in the space sector. For instance, establishment criterion. We have an EU-based satellite company operating satellites and dealing with personal data from space. Establishment criterion. The GDPR will be applicable, but it doesn't necessarily have to be an EU-based space company. It can be an US-based space company which provides services such as Earth observation, GPS, that provides the services to the European Union, to any country of the European Union, and tackles data from European Union citizens. So in this case, both the scenarios would comply with the territoriality criterion, therefore could be subject to the General Data Protection Regulation. Now, there is another factor that enters into the equation, the controller. The controller, according to the definition provided by the GDPR in Article 4, is the person that processes data. Can also be the processor that doing it on behalf of the controller. I've talked about companies, about private companies. What if it is a European Union institutional body, the one processing space data? For instance, there is the Galileo, the Copernicus, Galileo is another one, the Copernicus program in the European Union space program, and it is run by the European Commission. So the European Commission is the control. In that case, the GDPR is not applicable, but Regulation 2018/1725, because it deals specifically with the controller being one of these European Union institutional bodies. The content is basically very similar to the GDPR, so it doesn't require much explanation on it. So, up until now, my conclusions are the following. First of all, we can say effectively that the GDPR, and where applicable, the Regulation 2018/1725, apply to personal data that may stem from space data. So there is a regulatory framework protecting raw data, but I have identified so far 4 challenges the GDPR would leave unattended, and of course, in which I would like to continue researching for the time I have left here. The first one, data transfers in our space. Data transfers are governed by Chapter 5 of the GDPR, Articles 44 to 50. If we go through the provisions, we will be able to see that they basically refer to data transfers on Earth, which is the way it is currently done. Because I told you before that when the raw data is obtained by space systems, it is transferred to a ground station where it is on Earth. But there is a growing tendency towards creating mega constellations of satellites. We have currently the Starlink constellation by Elon Musk, which basically means there are small or medium satellites put together and making kind of a constellation. So there is a tendency towards making these private constellations into supranational constellations. Constellations not just from one private company, but from different governments or different companies. In the case of different governments, what if we want to transfer this space data to another satellite of this mega constellation without sending it first to the ground station? Could this data transfer be governed by the GDPR? That is my first question. Second one, we have the use of artificial intelligence. Of course, we are all familiar with artificial intelligence. It has come to make a revolution out of everything, and the space sector has not been the exception. It is currently used to avoid collisions among satellites, many other issues. And of course, it is also used for the processing of data because it is faster and it is easier. There is Article 22 of the GDPR, which says that we have a right not to be subject to automated decision-making, including profile. My question is this right extendable to outer space? Is the use of artificial intelligence putting at a greater risk our right to data protection because it facilitates the use of raw data together with other data sets like facial technologies that could make an individual identifiable, that could get away with this pseudonymization current, for instance? Third one, now let's imagine there is a satellite, private satellite or state-owned satellite, which is collecting data from Earth that can make us identifiable, and it suffers from a cyber attack. Currently, at the European Union level, there are two different directives put in place as regards cybersecurity. The TER directive, which identifies what is critical infrastructure, space systems are categorized as critical infrastructure, and NIS2 directive, which deals with cybersecurity strategies at a nation. My question is, do these strategies tackle the issue of stolen personal data from satellites? Does the GDPR do? I'll leave it there. And the last, and in my opinion, the trickiest question, which is the use of dual-use space systems. Traditionally, space systems were categorized into two different types, either civilian or military. But nowadays, this categorization has its flaws because there are dual use. That is, it's both civilian and military. This has raised already questions as regards the application of international humanitarian law, the law of armed conflicts, to satellites in cases of a cyber attacks. But as regards data protection, what I don't see clear is if we have a system of these characteristics collecting our personal data, is the GDPR applicable? How can we know for which purposes is this data being collected? For civilian purposes, for military? Because Article 2 of the GDPR says that it falls outside of the scope of the GDPR, the collection of the personal data for national security purposes. So in my opinion, this is the trickiest one. But overall, my conclusion is that there is no effectively instrument that correctly guarantees our right to the protection of personal data. Although we can rely somehow on the GDPR or the regulation 2018/1725, it is important and it is desirable to adopt an international treaty that deals with these characteristics. In the framework of the United Nations, for instance, that is from where the most of these treaties come from. And in this sense, I think that the GDPR could be a good reference framework for it, because it can make up for the shortcomings of the already mentioned international space law legislation, such as the remote sensing principles. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Jose. Questions?
Yes, Pedro.
Yeah. Congratulations for your presentation. It was really amazing. This is a very new topic for me, but we used to work with this kind of data, so it's not like too far of our work. So I have two questions, but you can answer. They are very related, so you can answer just once. You know, no problem with that. First of all, some of the people, some legal scholars say that when you talk about technology and law, they're always about something about like reactive, law. It's just about reactions, you know. So always the technology is faster, you know, than the law. So what countries can't do? And I mean countries, because I came from Latin America. We don't have the European Union. So it's just about global agreements. It's just about international agreements, or maybe countries have like a faster answer to this kind of problems. Is it possible? I don't know what your opinion on this. And the second one is about the ethical dimensions, because you did a very normative analysis and you explained that. And you're focused on particular context in Europe with this kind of regulations. But what about the ethical dimensions? Because maybe if you offer an ethical argument, I mean, not just about, I'm not changing your argument. It's more about adding new things, you know, about more ethical dimensions that may cover another kind of realities, you know, on other kind of countries. So maybe it can help us to understand what if these problems can be like faced in different countries, you know. And finally, the last question is about privacy, because privacy is like the main concept here, I think. But most of the legal scholars say that this is like a very subjective concept. I mean, when I talk with my students, they have a very different concerns about privacy than me. You know? How can we face that? This different maybe consideration of privacy that maybe we can find in different countries, in different generations. Maybe privacy right now is going to be too much different than privacy 20 years more, you know. So these are my three questions. I'm very related, so you can just give me one answer.
So I'll try to give one answer, but if I don't answer to any of your questions, I really just tell me. I'll try my best. It is true that when we talk about technology and law, there is always first technology. So law acts as a reaction. And this is an argument I was having the other day with a friend, because I don't think that is completely right. I understand, because we cannot put in place regulation without a social context. But the persons, and I include myself, who work with international space law, we are used to work in advance of these things happening. Why? Because the space sector develops in such a fast way that you have to bear in mind what can happen and try to give solutions for that, for when the moment comes. I'm just a scholar, I'm not a legislator.
So, just one clarification. You said space law develops in such a fast way, or is it space technology?
Space technology.
All right, because the last law was from quite a few years ago. So no, it's mainly because I think you said space law rather than space technology. Yeah.
Sorry. So that is the issue. That's why I'm considering things that have not yet happened, but are expected to happen. And in general, in the discipline, we work like that. Is that the right approach or not? That depends on anybody, but on every person, but that's how we work. Considering ethics, yes, I totally agree. I think this is an issue that should be tackled on an international level. And not because underdeveloped countries, for instance, doesn't have access to space technologies the way bigger countries can do. This means they don't have a voice or they don't have a say in such a regulation. And of course, their voices should be included in discussions. There was in 2010s, more or less, last decade, there was already a discussion on an international treaty of these characteristics, and it was brought up by Brazil, the Brazilian delegation. So nowadays, space technologies are accessible to everyone, and believe me, Latin American countries, for instance, are really getting into it. We have India. India is one of the space powers nowadays. So it is something that should be regarded from an international perspective and should bring everyone in. That is difficult for sure. And with the concept of privacy, there is a clear signal, because privacy differs on everyone. But I think that the United Nations work is the United Nations is a place to discuss about those things, to reach conclusions. It was not easy to adopt the 1986 remote principles, believe me. I've read all the resolutions and all the working papers, and it was not easy because there were some countries saying, okay, but what about underdeveloped countries? Okay, but I want to do this, I want to do that. It's very difficult, and it took 15 years to adopt those principles. So I think there is a possibility to adopt such an instrument, although it may be difficult and it can take lots of time.
Yeah, questions?
Curiosity, you showed us the European Union case, and I agree with you about the reason why you decided to focus on this case, but I was wondering if, in your opinion, to your knowledge, there are some regulations from other countries in the world which are better suited to, with respect to your 4 points in your conclusion, to your 4 critiques, if there might be some regulations that can serve as a reference for the European Union legislator in dealing with these critiques.
Yes, concretely, in the case of data transfers, I believe, I may be mistaken, but I think that the Californian legislation do address this issue. So that may be complement what the GDPR says. In general, the Californian legislation is very close in content to the GDPR, but I do think it says something else about data transfers. But as the rest of the challenges, it's just something that came to my mind. And as I was saying to Pedro, I'm kind of advancing what is going to happen, is likely to happen. So, but yeah, the California legislation could be a good example, for instance.
Who else? Victor?
Yes, thank you for your presentation. My question can be very short or long, whatever you want. And my question is regarding the enforcement of whatever legislation comes up or the already present legislation. Because it seems to me enforcements in S are much more simple for a policing aspect, I mean, for the government side. But I'm thinking nowadays satellites are being created by private companies, and you have mentioned these private owned constellations. So, and policing and enforcement of any type of transfer in space of any type of information will have to do it will have to be in space, because I wonder this data will never go out of there. So I wonder about the enforcement of any of these regulations.
Okay, so from a GDPR perspective, there is enforcement, and there is a figure, European Protection Data Supervisor, that is in charge of enforcing all these issues. So I do believe this is enforceable. As regards international law, it's like everything. Public international law was created because of the good of the states, and we are reliant on the good of the states. If states do not want to comply with it, they will not. But I think we are kind of changing the game, because, for instance, the other day, this is not related to data privacy, but is related to the space sector. The other day, there was the first fine imposed to a company in the US because they refused to deorbit a satellite, an old satellite. This is a huge issue because it causes space debris, space junk all over space, and that can cause collisions towards other satellites. But there was a government imposing a fine to a company because it decided not to deorbit the satellite. So in the same way, we can apply it to this case, but of course that could take time.
Okay, my questions. Thank you very much for presenting the topic. I think it's massively interesting. But one of the things you highlighted when you were talking about the corpus of international space law, and forgive me if I got it wrong, but concerns with the exception of when, let's say, satellites fall into Earth, things that happen in outer space. When we're talking about data protection, and then it concerns things that happen in Earth. So that materialize in Earth, they might take place somewhere else, but they materialize here. And when you presented the challenges, all your 4 challenges seem to happen in outer space at the moment. So if there's a hacking of a system there, it might not be, unless you regulate it now, but it might not be a problem or a crime unless it has some repercussions on people here on Earth. So my question is that you're highlighting first, what is the risk of that happening? If it happens, then probably it's very high. But then also, you were highlighting that we need to do a new type of, let's say, regulation that would be different. How would that be different from the current GDPR, and in which specific aspects? Considering
that a space-related activity doesn't have necessarily to take place on Earth. Space is done on Earth. We do space technologies and we analyze data. Everything is done on Earth, but that is about to change. And that is why the current legislation should take into consideration that maybe in the not too distant future, this processing can take place in outer space. So if they're basically considering that everything is happening on Earth, because that's the traditional way to do it, if it happens not on Earth, but in outer space, is this legislation gonna be effective? That is where I tried to showcase.
But how would it look different from the one that we have already on Earth?
Basically adding a sentence, not in law, it's very easy to create loopholes. You have to say everything, or at least have a court interpret that in the way you want. So if you make no reference to something being made in outer space, there is no regulation of that happening in outer space. How can that be changed? Adding data processing in outer space, collection in outer space. I think that could be very helpful in clarifying.
Okay, any other questions? Well, then bit of my feedback on this. I think this, I have to congratulate you. This is a way of actually doing a presentation. And you see it in the number of questions that you have. You presented a topic that is highly technical. None of us are lawyers here. And you got it. Sorry?
I'm a lawyer. But I didn't work as a lawyer.
I also have a degree in law, but I'm not a lawyer in any way. So it's you engage the audience, and you did it actually very well. It's highly technical, it's complex, but you presented with examples, with in a very, very clear way. If I have one criticism, some of your slides towards the end are too verbose. You have far too many words. I think it's probably because lawyers like to put a lot of words, but you might want to do it in separate slides. And but I think at the beginning, the way you framed the whole thing was really, really good. And the challenges that you're highlighting were very clear. I would have liked to see a bit more of how do you address this and how does it become different from what we have. Having said that, I have the same concern as Pedro has. I use satellite imagery.
I think we all do.
No, but not just to check whether my neighbor has got a swimming pool or not. I use it extensively to actually measure economic growth by using night lights emissions at very, very fine scales. I mean, not as fine as you do, but below 1 hectare.
Yeah.
Am I illegal?
No. No, in fact, there is something I can add. And is that in the United States, for instance, there is a policy not allowing companies to develop technology, at least civilian, of course, military will know, they do what they consider, but below a certain threshold. So I think that could also be done in the European Union context, not allowing to have imagery that is below, let's say, 30 centimeters, which is the one actually right now at the market.
Let me just, you can see everything, so.
Maybe set up a higher one.
But
I think 30 because that's the US way.
are there maybe special agreements about some companies? Because I remember that in one of the seminar series in geography, one professor from another university shared with us like different sites, official sites, even government sites that provide this kind of data. So maybe there are like some exceptions. I don't know. This is just a question. I mean,
Yeah, military reconnaissance satellites can see everything. And they've always been the exception to anything. The GDPR, I commented on the remote sensing principles also. There is a complete freedom in outer space for any satellite to go through the territory of another state and see what they want. So military reconnaissance satellites operate in the lowest orbit, and that of course makes it easier for them to see everything.
For example, we use satellite imagery from different satellites. So the pre-2012 images were good, but now post-2012, we can see everything.
Yes.
And we have access to the sort of images you showed at the beginning. So we know how many planes are there, not but in great detail, and we know what type of planes more or less, because you can almost read the model of the plane. You can, in fact, when you are in a normal civilian airport, you know which company owns every plane at the detail that we're using, and we're using at aggregate level for the whole world. So that's why I'm concerned. Am I illegal or not?
For the moment, you are not illegal.
Okay, fine. So thank you very much, and thank you very much for coming. Remember to all of you following us from home that we have this once a term, but we also hold on a regular basis a lot of other events. And please check us and follow us both on Twitter and on LinkedIn, because you will get the information about the forthcoming events that we will include, for example, the Ambassador of Spain, or we haven't got the date yet, but it's also the Commissioner for Cohesion and Reform from the European Union coming to London at the beginning of this. Okay, so thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much to the presenters, and see you all next time. Bye.
I can have your